Oh, hello. Welcome everyone out in YouTube land. Today we are going to be talking about why trauma-informed genealogy matters. And Bernadette and Michael and I are super excited about sharing this with you. As I'm sure if you're watching, you have probably had an experience with genealogy, whether it was I started my genealogy research and then I landed on something that was emotional, or I had an emotional event in my life and I then needed to go and do some family history research. So, from whatever perspective you might be coming from today, Michael and Bernadette are going to be kind of going over why it's important to have a safe space and a container when you're doing your genealogy research. So, before we kind of kick that off, though, I do want to bring up that a lot of evidence suggests that genealogy isn't just a historical hobby. There are actually been several research studies done on the impact of genealogy, for our mental well-being. There are research studies on the shock and emotional distress of family discoveries. There's identity crisis, which we've talked about before, identity disruption and crisis. There's also a term called genealogical bewilderment. Um, and that refers to a longing for a biological connection to family, people, and places that we just don't have, kind of feeling lost and alone in the world. There's also grief responses, shame activation, trauma reenactment. So, having the experience of just reenacting traumas that have been in our family for generations. And then the one that we talked about a couple of weeks ago was this feeling of betrayal through the discovery of DNA. So we have a tremendous amount of things that we can cover and go through today, but we're gonna narrow it down and keep it simple. Today, I wanna open up with a question for Bernadette and Michael. Bernadette and Michael, what are some of the ways that you have seen? I know both of you kind of came into genealogy and then you started helping others through some emotional issues. And so what are some of the trauma responses that you've seen in your work?
So I see people coming out, as you say, people coming at from different lenses, and very often when you ask people, what do you know about your family, you get very, very different responses. And I've had people tell me that they knew everything about their family. And I've had people tell me that they knew nothing about their family. And I've had people tell me they know a bit about this side and nothing about the other side. All three of these are red flags. Because typically, if people have been doing conventional genealogy, they have no understanding of the trauma-informed side of it. Very often they may not hit anything that's particularly startling, or sometimes they do. And that was what happened to me, and the whole thing just blew up from there. And I was like, what is this thing that's happened? So people can come in from a great variety of directions, but generally the common denominator is that they've been if they have done genealogy work, they've been looking for facts and not for feelings.
And I would add to that the trauma responses that I have seen in people, most of it comes in the it begins in particularly if it's a really difficult thing, in the not really recognizing it, wanting to push it back and not wanting to go. Often there is a family story and they want to stick with the family story. They don't want to go to whatever really has been uncovered. And so it really depends on what we have uncovered about what kind of reactions that they have. But they're definitely, they feel it in their bodies. And I think that is the most important thing. And wherever that comes up in your body, whether it brings you to tears or you're suddenly feeling uncomfortable and feel like you have knots in your stomach, those are all kind of trauma reactions. So anything that you feel when you discover something new you can know that this is kind of important because your body is reacting to it.
What I see is that people don't have a language for trauma. So they know there's something there, but they're not able to articulate it. And very often with the trauma, particularly inherited one, happened before they developed the capacity for language. So it hit them at a time when they had no language skills. And even though they later developed those skills, you don't go back in and fill in that space. And people come in and you have a conversation, and what happens is that the conversation just goes into this nowhere space of they've got these feelings or they've got these symptoms. They may be physical symptoms like muscular symptoms, they may be emotional symptoms, but they just kind of run aground. The questions you just end up getting a non-answer. And those non-answers, it's like, okay, we haven't been able to, we need to go from something generic here, these feelings or these symptoms, whatever they are, and get to somewhere specific.
So what I'm hearing both of you say is that a trauma-informed genealogist understands that the records live in the nervous system or they impact the nervous system. The records are directly related to the nervous system. And Michael and Bernadette, you both brought up that as a genealogist, you kind of come to a place where language is not enough, and you can definitely tell that there's something else there. That raises a question for me, which is, in any field that we're in, what is the ethical responsibility of a genealogist if someone is having what I as a therapist would consider a trauma response? And Michael, I think you just described one.
It's very, I'm not quite sure what the word is, but you have to go very, very, very lightly. And you have to do that for a number of reasons. You've got somebody approaching you who doesn't have the ability to articulate. They've got a disembodied experience. They can't articulate it. There's something going on that they don't know about. And in all probability, they are probably the most sensitive person in their family. And the rest of the family is even less articulate and less interested. So you're potentially dealing with a can of worms. So you need to figure out what's going on and work from there, depending on, first of all, not everybody who comes saying they want healing actually wants healing. I've had instances of people come and have a session, and we've identified something deeper down, and then they've gone, no, I don't want to touch it. So, Bernadette.
Well, what keeps coming up for me is when somebody comes to me, what I want to do is hold the space for them. And what Michael is saying, sometimes people have this interest in knowing more about their family and taking that, wanting to look back and see, but they don't, as Michael said, they're not really looking for healing because they don't understand that they even need it. They don't really, there is this desire to want to know more. And as you sit with them, and they usually are, just as Michael said, the more sensitive one in the family, the one who is looking for answers. When you sit with them and allow them to absorb the information, you see a transformation in some way, even if it's a little bit of a pushback because they want to say, no, that's not our family story. They want to push. I'll use an example. I had a client who, and I've shared this before, but her grandfather actually shot her grandmother. She lived. He was a very sick man at the time, but it was one of those things they wanted to put over to the side. And when I took her through and we found a newspaper article that talked about the whole incident, it suddenly, she was willing to accept it into her family. If that, she was willing to allow that incident and know that this happened because he was a very sick man, and he thought he was losing his wife, and so there was a backstory. So that's kind of so holding the space when they first come in, as you begin to go through it, and then letting them kind of guide you. But they are often
a client who came presenting with a situation, and they were very, very engaged. They'd done quite a bit of different therapies, so they had quite a facility to be able to go into the inner space. And we made some progress, and then we were working through, and I asked a question relating to their father, and I literally saw them wince. I saw their body just kind of kicked, and their tone of voice suddenly became quite brittle, and they said, "Do we really need to look at that?" And so you could see that even though there's a push-pull going on in people between the part of them that wants healing and the part of them that feels it should just toe the family line. And it's negotiating that push-pull both with them and by extension with the family.
So I just want to bring the conversation back to kind of defining what a trauma-informed genealogist is doing here. And I'm hearing a couple of things from both of you. One is being able to hold a space where a person comes in to meet with you, and they're having big emotional reactions that they don't know what to do with. And so a classically trained genealogist, as opposed to someone who's trauma informed, may or may not know how to hold the space. And then the second one, right, well, I just lost the second one, the one that Michael was saying. Hold on, it'll come back to me. I got lost in the holding the space. And a client being able to articulate, just articulate in general. Michael, you had mentioned that earlier. Whether or not they're willing to kind of do deeper work. When would you both say maybe you might need to speak with a therapist about the things that we're doing here? We've kind of done as much as we can do. And what would be an example of saying, maybe now it's time for you to go and do some trauma processing, or talk to someone about your relationship with your family member, that sort of thing?
What I would say to that, both Michael and I are very trained in trauma, and we understand trauma reactions, responses, what trauma looks like in a tree, in a family tree, how to find those things. And so I think from my perspective, we can see the overwhelm that somebody might have. And we also know that the process that we take them through can be supported by therapy, where they are talking to a therapist that is dealing more just with the emotional part, where we are, again, I use the word holding space because it's just where we're holding space for them to be able to come back and forth, like to have connection with a therapist that can help them deal maybe with issues with family members, and that this is bringing up, patterns of behavior, which we've talked about. So I think it is because we are we know, we both understand trauma. And so we have that, it does reach a point where we both know that somebody, it would be helpful if they were. And often people are already, there's so many people that are working with therapists now that it's a welcomed, kind of mix between the two.
Yeah, definitely. I find I have some clients who just want to come to talk about whatever it is. So for instance, I have a client who's actually started with a therapist, with a counselor, and the counselor said, I think you need somebody who knows trauma. And then they found me from that, and they have sessions in parallel. And basically when I'm working with them, I'm working with principles and processes and mentally understanding what they're going through. And they're doing more the emotional processing is in face-to-face sessions with a therapist, and that's the face-to-face situation is more conducive than online for that, and that's been a successful combination. Some people want to combine the genealogy, that work with the feelings, but work with me. And so it's a matter of seeing how it works, and every case is you have to spend some time finding out what the best approach is for each client.
Now, I know, Bernadette, you will do research for the clients. And Michael, do you do the genealogical research for the clients in your work today?
I don't do the research, but I do context research.
Okay, tell us about that. Tell us about
So if somebody comes with a specific situation, they're coming from a specific cultural background, or whatever, and it's like, okay, what happened there? And so I will go in and actually have a look at the historical record and get a sense of the situation that the family has been through, so that I can ask more intelligent questions. So, for instance, where were their families in World War II? Where were their parents' families in World War II? Because very often there's trauma in there, and it's like, okay, your parents, your father's family was here, and your mother's family was there, and just by having a general idea of where they are, I can have a sense of what some of the big ticket items that may have impacted them are, so I can then ask some more directed questions of them.
Okay, so Michael, you do the historical contextual digging. And Bernadette, tell us a little bit about the depth of genealogy that you do, along with emotional work.
So I am trained. I know how to build a family tree. I know how to do all of the research as a genealogist would. The difference is genealogists are honoring the tree in a way that they want to make sure that everything is correct on that tree and go back as far as they can. And so my job is I go slower, and I'm looking at those documents a little more carefully to see, as I'm adding people to the tree, I'm looking to see what the relationship of the family, what's been going on, and I'm able to, in that process, through looking at documents and records, I see the differences. I can see things that when we've talked about this, something's missing, somebody's not there, all these different things that show up. So I am able to, with the background that I have in trauma, that I'm able to really understand how this shows up in a family tree. And often people will come to me whose trees have already been built, so that they will have, they've already done the genealogy work, but now they're asking, or they've had somebody do the tree work, but they're asking for a deeper understanding and wanting to know more of the story. And that's really, we're capturing the story of the family as we do the trauma informed. And because along with trauma, and we've talked about this, comes resilience. So we're looking for both of those. The trauma is usually what is the most helpful for people to recognize, oh my goodness, I didn't know this was in my family. And then taking them to the resilience, which says, oh my goodness, I can't believe they made it through that. So there's a two sides to that.
Yeah, my approach is quite different because I'm not a trained genealogist, but I'm working more with the issue. So people don't come to me looking for genealogy. They come because they've got some kind of issue that's difficult to unravel. And most of my work is either people recognize that it may be a trauma response of some kind. A lot of work I do around shame and also around toxic masculinity. So typically people are coming with an issue from one of those areas. And then as we move into it, I start asking the questions about the family. And very often, very few of the people I encounter have done any serious genealogy. Very often they go, I don't really know. Sometimes they say, oh yeah, I've looked at all that, but they've looked at it, but they haven't seen. And it's, as Bernadette says, it's being able to look at the documents, look at what's missing, look at as we've said, we look for disturbances in the soil of the family that's got this beautiful appearance of all being well tilled, but we know there are disturbances underneath it. And so it's looking for signs, looking for the places, the things that our ancestors were ashamed of and didn't really want to document and didn't want to talk about. And it's those sort of null spaces in the family record and in the family narrative. Very often it's in the narrative more than the record, and those are the places that I tend to zone in on.
Yeah.
Okay, so coming from two very different places, Michael, people come to you because they're having, mostly men, I'm hearing, they're having some sort of emotional issue, and then they kind of get tricked because they don't know that Michael is going to deep dive back into their family history and ask them to do that. And then Bernadette, yours is more direct. It sounds like people come to you a lot of times having searched, having worked with other genealogists, and they're looking to put together the narrative that maybe wasn't done with traditional genealogy.
That is very true. And, it's the way I kind of talk about it, to give a visual. I like Michael's, talking about the disturbance. For me, so many people come thinking, if you think of a puzzle and you get a puzzle and there's a nice picture on the front and it looks like, okay, this is what we're going to have inside and we're going to put this all together. But the work I do, it ends up, it's an old puzzle and you open it up and there are pieces that are torn. There are pieces that have been ripped off where the top isn't even on it. And then you find out there are actually pieces from other puzzles that are in there. And so it is, so sometimes people coming thinking that we're going to put together this beautiful puzzle because here's the picture, I have the picture. And then as we go through it, they're like, I had no idea this was there. So.
Great imagery, Bernadette. I think that is so true. I want to bring up some topics that we've discussed in other conversations before, but just since we're doing an overview today, I'm just going to say some terms, and if you guys have experienced them in your work with clients, we can go from there. Emotional suppression. Has emotional suppression shown up in your work? Client examples? If so, how so?
Do you want to take that, Michael?
Yeah, I'm just searching for.
Okay, I'll take it. It is. It's when emotional suppression comes in, it really is. you can just see it in them because they're finding out information that is very, and we can use the word toxic, or very, really very different from what they thought. And their responses can often be plain, like they don't react to it. And they're not reacting to it because they really in that moment don't know how to process it. This is not the story that they've been told, or that they've had no idea that this was under there. So when we discover that, that's when it calls for real gentleness. Michael will know that. Real gentleness in helping them to understand that we can look at this and unpack this a little bit more, but holding that the fact that they're not ready to fully accept the story that's in front of them.
Yes. So I have a client with the emotional suppression is literally in a clenched muscle, and it's literally they've been holding on so tightly that this muscular tension has become embedded, and they've been doing it pretty much their whole life. And the thing is getting back to, when did that happen? How did it happen? What caused it to happen? And some of this I find is actually, with releasing the emotional suppression, is actually having an answer that the mind is able to accept. Because the mind kind of sits there going, if the mind doesn't accept that this is something that's come down from somebody's grandfather or wherever, then it just shuts it out, and you can't release the suppression. But if you can actually pick through and create a coherent narrative of the family and say, look, this is the narrative that came down, and then the mind can accept that this is what it's doing, and it's part of the releasing process.
Michael, I love the way that you just described healing from trauma. Any healing from trauma is creating a coherent narrative that the mind can accept. Mm-hmm. That is the process of recovery. And there are so many narratives that we don't want to accept. Another one is addiction cycles in families. Can either of you speak to addiction cycles in families and how those get kind of embedded in our nervous system as well?
Yeah, my husband passed away from alcoholism, so I have, there is alcoholism in my family as well. And what happens with families when they are dealing with addiction, they're really focusing on the person that is struggling, and they're only focusing on their behavior and what is going on with them and how that is affecting you as a person. So whether you're the child, whether you're the spouse, whether it is your grandparents, whoever, addiction is a trauma response. Really, it is when you're overwhelmed with what has gone on in your life, what has been passed down to you, and it's escape. And so people who are addicted, whatever it is a way to deal with the pain that they are feeling. But others in the family, whether you're looking back and seeing, I'm all Irish, so whether you're looking back and seeing people with alcoholism back through the generations and wanting to separate yourself from that because that's so you don't want to be a part of that, or you're dealing with it in your life right now. Both of them are, when we begin to understand the trauma that is behind that, and as we explain the trauma that's been passed down, it's so helpful for people to have that understanding, because it helps them move from, I come from an alcoholic family, to that come from a family that's experienced a lot of trauma. And those are two very different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, so the trauma cycle and the addiction cycle are basically identical, and they're a coping mechanism. It's you're under pain, you're under stress, and you have something that brings you relief, so you go and do it compulsively, which is to say with no real control over it. And obviously if it's something like drinking alcohol, taking drugs, something like this is going to go badly for you, and then you kind of have some kind of crash, and you get into guilt and shame around your behavior, and so then you stop and you say, right, I'm never going to do that again, and then the pressure comes back on, and what do? You go back into your loop. So we have a very narrow definition for addiction. We tend to think of the obvious things like alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, sex addiction, porn addiction. We've got this kind of little list of them, but actually there's a lot of trauma-driven behavior which can be addictive, which we actually don't recognize. So for instance, somebody could be completely immersed in a hobby. And I think a lot of men, they get caught up in hobbies, and they spend huge amounts of money on, it could be any kind of hobby. And that's exactly the same. And if they've got the income to support it, you don't actually see it as an addiction. And also some people have a helping addiction. They don't feel valued unless they're doing something helpful. And you particularly find this in caring industries. When people are doing all of this stuff, and it's amazing and helpful and beneficial, and yet at the same time, it's actually coming as a coping mechanism. And I just very quickly want to share with you, I had a very fascinating experience of addiction around financial trauma. So there's been financial trauma in my family for quite some time. And a couple of years ago, I was working on myself, trying to break through this trauma. And suddenly I found myself on eBay bidding on Swiss stamps. And as soon as I saw myself doing this, going crazy, bidding on all of these Swiss stamps, I knew I had broken into the trauma. And that was a repetition of a trauma that my father went through. So he had a very disrupted childhood, and the thing he loved was stamps. And he used to buy up stamps, and he would find the valuable ones that nobody else had spotted. And in the 60s and 70s, he used to build up these collections of valuable stamps and sell them off at a profit. And then eBay came along, and everybody emptied their attics, and suddenly the world was awash with stamps, and the value just of them collapsed. And yet he couldn't stop doing that behavior. And even when he was very elderly and say wasn't well off, he was still spending money that he should not have been spending on these stamps. And so when I went to primary school in Switzerland, and so what I knew was happening was that I'd broken into that pattern, and this is the stamp collection I wished I'd had as a child to make me feel better. And it actually played out over a period of about 18 months until I finally got to a point where it's like, the addiction ran its course because I was able to sit with it being trauma informed rather than just repeating it indefinitely. I was able to sit with all of the feelings and unpick everything that had happened in the family around it. And eventually it just ran its own course, and the addiction and the trauma cycle behind it disappeared.
Amazing. Yeah. It's amazing that being trauma informed can unlock things in your life, and you can just start to see the stories differently. What would you say to, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk to genealogists who might be listening. One is, if you're a genealogist and you somehow stumbled upon our channel, but you're not really interested in, it's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to hold space for people. I just want to do the research. Then what would you say about what would you say to them about, well, this is the bare minimum that you need to know just to be able to get them to someone who might actually want to support them in a way different than what you're doing?
I think that's a great question. And it is a great question because even when they're not looking for the trauma, a genealogist, as I said, especially one who is, a high level one who's really looking and is presenting a very detailed genealogical story at the end, is trying to stay in that, wanting this to be really, well done and detailed. And along the way, they are uncovering trauma. And sometimes because they run into the person who's been in the war, they run into, these are famine families, they run into all of those things. And so it depends on their level. You can stay there, but it depends on their level. It goes into their bodies, to be honest, because we all have experienced trauma. It has come down through our families. And so I would say to somebody who is listening, it is so beneficial to at least understand how powerful the trauma can be in families, and that there is a level of when maybe this is a way, in addition to the work that they have done to create this tree, that they can then say, there may be somebody who can help you with the trauma-informed part of this, where you can go a little bit deeper into the stories of these families. And especially when genealogists find something that the family didn't expect, and it's a complete opposite of who they thought they were. And a family who's thinking, can't wait to get this genealogy report, and then suddenly they're not related to who they thought they were related, and it comes as a shock that, oh, we're just plain olds instead of royalty or whatever. So there's so many the reason for people wanting to know more about their story comes with so many different emotions. And so that's what I would say. That's the great thing between the genealogy work I do and the genealogy work somebody else does, is that we both, together, we really complement each other. And that's really what I would say.
Okay, so what I heard you say, Bernadette, was knowing how to recognize signs of trauma and making a proper referral would be super helpful for your clients.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Being a trauma-informed genealogist is not for everyone. Not everybody, say, it wants to hold space. It's a very curious mixture of the methodical approach of the genealogist, but also you have to be very fluid, and you have no idea what, particularly if you're working with a client emotionally, you have no idea where, things can take a turn in any direction at any moment. And you have to be comfortable with that, and which really means you need to have done some of your own work as well. But I say, for me, the important thing is not seeing these discoveries that are unexpected as a setback or a problem, because they're actually a part of the journey towards the family having a more truthful version of its own narrative. And it's just recognizing that this has come up and being able to say, maybe you need to talk to somebody who's a trauma-informed genealogist.
Or a genealogy-informed therapist, which is also
absolutely. Yeah.
And what just came up for me is genealogists will stumble on this. We've talked about my client who had asked me, that had that relationship with her father and her grandfather. And as we looked through, we found that her grandfather had changed the name and that she was of Jewish ancestry. She came to me with the emotional part. But if she had come only saying, oh, I want to do my family tree, that information would have been found very quickly. And so a genealogist wouldn't necessarily, they would share the information, but they might not know how to handle the reaction of, or what that might, or how they could assist their client knowing that this could be a real emotional thing for them.
So you're bringing up a good point, because genealogists so often are in the position where they are discovering and having to disclose difficult information. And, being a therapist, I have done I've done workshops on being a trauma-informed coach, helping lawyers know how to interface if someone is experiencing a trauma response in their office. I've even worked with veterinarians who and helped them understand what a trauma response looks like if someone brings their pet in and is having a trauma response. So from a therapist perspective, we think everyone should be trauma informed, because if you can be perceptive to a person's body language and their responses, then you're more likely to be able to help them, to have good rapport with them and keep them as a client. If you say something off-putting to someone who is in emotional distress and doesn't even recognize it, then they're not likely to come back to you for your services, whatever your services are, whether you're the, a cashier, or whether you're providing a service, a professional service. So what I'm hearing you say is being trauma informed doesn't require that you become a therapist and you do therapy with your clients, but it does require that you understand what trauma looks like and have the knowledge to direct them in the right direction, as well as being compassionate to them while they are with you and doing the work with you as well. Anything that you would add to that or change?
I think it's a good summary.
Mm.
So I have one question here. What is the one thing that you wish every genealogy researcher understood before starting a journey with a client?
I would say that there are things missing, there are spaces, there are absences. And with the trauma-informed genealogy, you're looking for the absence as much as for the presence. And it's just having an eye open. Here in Britain, we'd call that a weather eye. If you're on a boat, you're just keeping an eye on the weather. And it's if you're looking at a situation and you're seeing that there's something going on there that may be distressing, there may be something that's going on. In a book called The Scarlet Sisters, Helen Batten wrote that the popularity of a marriage could be told by the number of wedding photographs that survived. So that's the kind of way of looking at the information. People bring you this record and say, we've got this information. And you're looking at it through a different lens and saying, hey, we've got this, but what haven't we got? Why haven't we got? So yeah, my recommendation is just you keep that sort of that sideways glance going.
And my I understand, I know when genealogists start out that they are very equipped to uncover many of the things that we are uncovering. And so I think what I would say is it's not about our connection and wanting to share this information. It's not about us wanting to teach you how to be a genealogist, because I know how that works. But there is this understanding of allowing the emotional part, having, like Michael said, that when that emotional part comes in, to don't gloss over it and know that it's a bigger part of what you're sharing than just what you're finding on the tree. I think
Thank you, Bernadette and Michael. The only thing I guess I would add as a therapist would be, if we know our scope of practice and our boundaries, and we know what we can personally handle and what we can't in an interaction, then it becomes very clear. It also is helpful if you know that there are people out there that you can refer them to. And this, what we're talking about, is a newly blossoming field. So if there are genealogists out there who are like, well, where do I have connections with therapists? Can I talk to someone who is also doing genealogy work and is informed in trauma? Is there someone I can call just to bounce ideas off of? Or I've got this sticky ethical thing that I ran into and I don't know how to present it to the family. These are all things that being trauma informed and knowing trauma professionals can support you in your work as well. So if we can get really clear on the boundaries, and if we want to know how to hold space and help people with their family stories, then there's a lot of good work that we can do together.
Now, I'd just like to add, just picking up on the addiction thread, and the thing I've observed is that there are many people out there who are actually addicted to genealogy, and they're doing genealogical research incessantly, trying to go further up the family tree and more details and thing. And in my observation, some of them, they're actually looking for they're looking for facts, but unconsciously they're looking for the feelings in the family. So discovering those difficult things may actually be not a shock, but it can be a sense of relief, and it can be actually the thing that they didn't know they were looking for. And there's an opportunity to be part of that story of people actually realizing that what they wanted was emotional resolution and not a completely filled in family tree. Mm-hmm. And again, that's part of having a sort of different mindset about the data record.
Michael, I just thank you for saying that. And I just want to say that when my husband was so sick, that was my relief. That's what I was doing. It was genealogy. And I kept going, digging and digging and digging, because it took me away from where I was and brought me into a beautiful place. And so thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, if anyone listening today is interested in becoming a trauma-informed genealogist, we are kicking off that programming later in the year. And if you just have questions and you'd like to chat about what that might look like, please reach out to us. And if you're looking for support through your own genealogical research, Bernadette and Michael are available for sessions, and you can find that on our website at ancestralhealingcenter.com. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next week, where we will have another episode focusing on trauma-informed genealogy as well.